Huda Beauty just came out with brand new blush palettes, so I thought we would go ahead and swatch and talk about all three. I was originally going to focus my efforts on one palette, but then I received them in PR and I wanted to show what these look like on medium deep skin tone. I also really wanted to get this review up because I know the Sephora sale is going on, so if you had wanted to get these at a bit of a discount, now might be a good time. We've got 3 palettes and each one retails for $43. This is the lightest one. It's called Toasty Peach, and then the one that I'm opening here is Baby Pink, and this is definitely the most different in my opinion. It's the one that's brightest. And then last but not least, we have Roseberry, and in my opinion, this is the deepest of the 3 palettes. The 2 I think are going to work best for me are Roseberry and Baby Pink. Okay, let's first start off by doing some swatches of the Toasty Peach palette. This has 3 matte blushes like all of them have, and it has a blush lighter. I'm calling it a blush lighter, but basically it's like a sparkly blush topper or highlighter. This is the palette that I find to be the lightest. Definitely not one that I would have gotten to work on my skin tone, though I think there's probably one blush in here that is definitely going to show up on me. Probably as a surprise to no one, I'm pretty excited about the blush lighters as well. I like this one because it looks like it has some iridescence to it. All of these matte blushes are definitely on the buildable side. I'm having to swatch them several times to get them to show up the way that I want them to, which doesn't concern me too much because swatching blushes and eyeshadows is completely different. Here's what all of the shades look like swatched in the back of my hand. This is probably a palette best suited for those that have light to light medium skin tone. Okay, and so what we're gonna do now is just apply each of the palettes from light to deep, starting off with the Toasty Peach palette. This shade here is too light for me, so it's not one that I am going to apply, but the other ones I think are gonna work, or at least I hope. So I'm gonna start off with this nude toned shade here and just apply it. Yeah, this actually is a really pretty kind of muted shade on me. And I don't know whether these 3 palettes were intended to be kind of light to deep. I don't feel like they're exactly set up that way, but this one to me is the lightest of the 3. So here, and I do feel like it looks a little bit deeper on my skin than in the pan. So here is what that shade looks like fully applied. And then what we're gonna do is go in with this richer shade here. This is really pretty. This is definitely a shade that I would like in a single shade. I don't know if she's gonna come out with anything other than the palettes, but I'm gonna go ahead and apply that to this cheek here. And yeah, this one also looks a little bit deeper on the skin than in the pan, which I always like and appreciate. So here is what that second shade looks like, and this is the deepest shade in the Toasted Peach palette, or the Toasty Peach palette. These blush toppers look really pretty. I'm going to use them and apply them at the top of the cheekbones and then also as an eyeshadow. Actually, I'm gonna put it as an eyeshadow first because I am really excited to use it that way. I have a little bit of crease shade down, so I'm just gonna use it as a lid shade. Because for all of these palettes that have shiny shades in them, like the NARS palette did, I would totally use these as eyeshadows too. And just go for a really pretty pink monochromatic moment. And I really like that. These are sparkly, so if you're not looking for a sparkly cheek, you may prefer using them as eyeshadow like this. Okay, and now I'm just gonna take a little bit on a slightly smaller brush and apply it at the top of the cheekbones. This is actually really pretty. But yeah, it definitely looks sparkly on the cheek. So you would have to be okay with a sparkly highlighter, but this is really pretty. And then I'm going to put it on the other side as well. I think this would be a really fun palette to use just mixing the shades together, and I know a lot of people have demoed kind of swirling all the shades together, but I really wanted to just show what each of the shades would look like kind of on their own, just so you get a sense for each of the three palettes, the shades in each of the three palettes. So here is what that more kind of pinker toned side looks like, and then here's what the more nude toned side looks like. Okay, and the next palette we have is the baby pink palette. This is basically like your bright, vibrant pinks. In my opinion, it's the most different from the other two. The others have some neutral tones in them, but other than that, it's set up the exact same way. You get a blush lighter and 3 matte blushes. And the texture of these blushes is such that you get a very subtle sheen. They're not kind of like a complete flat matte. And just like the first palette that I swatched, I really had to load up my fingertips with product and swatch several times with the matte blushes to get them to kind of show. But of course, the real test is going to be how these look when I apply them with a brush. I do kind of feel like when you see these swatched, the shades themselves look more similar than I would have thought, at least for this particular palette. Though it does kind of seem like you have one shade, that's the third shade that I swatched, that looks kind of distinctly deeper than the other shades. And the last shade looks like it's the most kind of cool toned pink of the 4. All right, now we are gonna dip into the palette that I may be the most excited for because it's the most different than the other two. This is the baby pink palette. And I don't know if I would really say that this is a medium palette, but I kind of felt like it was somewhere in between the other two. But anyway, we are gonna start off again, light to deep, starting off with this shade here. And I don't know, I feel like pink blush is having a moment right now. I think I'm going to be able to use all of the shades in this palette. Yeah, you know, this one honestly is a little light for me. Or like what I tend to go for, but I feel like it, you know, it does show up. It's just the tone of it is a little bit lighter than I would go for, but I would still use it, maybe like swirl it with the other shades. Then the next shade I'm going to use is this one here. Honestly, the tones of these two are pretty similar, but I feel like this one is going to more overpower this one. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm going to put this shade, the one that's a little bit less cool toned, on this side. Yeah. And here's what those two shades look like compared, so you can see the side clearly deeper. And then what I'm gonna do is put this one on top of the other two, so that I can just get an idea of what that shade would look like. So maybe I'll start off actually by putting it on this lighter shade side here. Yeah. So here is what that kind of deeper, cool toned pink looks like fully applied. And then again, we're gonna use the blush toppers, but we're gonna use them both on the eyes and on the cheeks. The formula of all of these feels similar. So sparkly, kind of blush type topper-like vibes. This makes for a really beautiful shimmer eyeshadow. So here is what it looks like. Okay, and then same deal. I'm gonna take a slightly smaller brush and apply these to the top of the cheekbones. All right, and here is what the baby pink palette is looking like fully applied. I also just want to get a little bit closer so you can get a look at this blush topper. For me, it's a standout from this palette. I really like this kind of blue purple shift that it has going. Okay, last but not least, we have the Roseberry palette, and I think in some ways this is the deepest of the three palettes, especially that last kind of fourth shade, but it has one matte blush in here that looks like it's going to be too light on my skin tone, just from a first glance. I do feel like that's something I find a little bit confusing about the layout of these palettes, but you'll have to let me know what you think in the comments. It just seems like more intuitive to have the palettes more on a light to deep kind of organization. But of course, I'll have more wrap-up thoughts at the end. Here's what all of the shades look like swatched on my fingertip. I gotta say, I really do think the blush lighters in all of these palettes are super pretty. And I honestly don't think I have a formula that's really quite like it. These are definitely more sparkly than the NARS that I just swatched and tried on earlier in the week. But the sparkle isn't a chunky sparkle. Okay, I don't think I was expecting to have to build up this fourth shade as much as I was for the swatch, but here is what all four shades look like swatched in the back of my hand. I think now that I see it fully swatched, I feel like this is the palette that's most my vibes. All right, last but not least, we are gonna dip into this Roseberry palette and again, start off with kind of light to deep. I'm not sure how this shade is gonna show up on my skin tone, so, we'll see. I may layer the deeper shade over top of it. Yeah, kind of a subtle blush, honestly, so I would say it's probably not, it's not too light. Actually a pretty kind of muted nude shade on me. So that is what the lightest shade is looking like. Next, we are gonna go into this more kind of pink toned shade, although a little bit more like a mauvey pink. It's not as warm toned as, or bold as some of the pinks in the baby pink palette. Ooh, I really like this tone of blush. That's pretty. And then because I do want to use this deeper shade, I'm gonna layer it on top of this lighter one just so I can get a sense for what that looks like, what the pigment in that and the tone of that looks like. This looks like it's gonna be a pretty nude toned blush as well. Yeah. So here is what each of the cheeks is looking like so far. And then we are gonna go in again with, actually, I'm gonna use this shade as a crease shade on my lids before I go in with the blush topper as an eyeshadow. Just pop this throughout the crease. And then we're gonna go in with this kind of pretty berry toned blush topper and place it on each lid. All right, now we're gonna take that same shade and apply it to the top of the cheekbones. All right, and here is what the Roseberry looks like fully applied. Honestly, I think that this is my favorite. I thought it was gonna be the pink one, but I think that this one is definitely most my vibes and most suited to my skin tone. Okay, here is what all 3 palettes look like swatched on my arm. I think right away the thing that kind of jumps out to me is that honestly, I don't think that there's enough depth in these palettes, especially because this is more of a buildable, kind of more gently pigmented formula. All right, now that we've had a chance to go through everything, let's close up with some wrap-up thoughts. I think that the price for these is overall pretty fair, especially compared to some of the other blush palettes that are on the market. You get 4 products inside each one. I think the packaging on these is honestly really cool and it feels heavy and pretty luxe. I wish that these palettes were set up in a more kind of traditional light to deep because, you know, I don't feel like I would consider this to be like a medium toned palette. And this to be fully like a deep toned palette. I think that there's some shades in each palette that don't necessarily work for me, are not well suited for me and my skin tone. And so I think that would have been something that would have been a little bit helpful. I also don't think that the kind of, you know, deepest shade or deepest palette is deep enough. So I think that we definitely needed 1, maybe 2 more palettes, and then potentially a lighter palette. Although the lightest palette isn't, you know, I do think that that will work for people with fairly light skin tones. But at least kind of 2 more on the deeper spectrum. Putting that aside, I really like the quality of these palettes, and I ended up really, really liking this Roseberry palette. If I could have only bought one for me and my skin tone, it would have been this. And this is definitely a palette that I can see myself using quite a bit more and traveling with this as well, because I think the size is quite nice for travel. And I like that you get kind of like a highlight blush topper combo in here. I think that may very well be my favorite part of the palette. Really like the effect that it gives, and I don't think it's actually too sparkly for day-to-day wear. All right, now that we've had a chance to go through everything, I'm really curious to know what you think of this launch and which of the 3 palettes you gravitate toward the most. As always, I really hope you found this video helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.